William Westmoreland. William Westmoreland misunderstood what his own metrics meant. As commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, Westmoreland built his entire strategy around gradually reducing the strength of his enemies. The idea was simple and brutally modern. If U.S. forces killed enemy soldiers faster than North Vietnam could replace them, the war would mathematically end. Victory would be visible in numbers. By 1966, people were already skeptical of those numbers. Field reports consistently inflated enemy body counts. Units were rewarded for high kill numbers, creating pressure to classify civilians as combatants and ambiguous encounters as victories. Intelligence analysts inside the CIA warned that enemy strength estimates were being deliberately suppressed to preserve the appearance of progress. Where Westmoreland went wrong was by rejecting those warnings. Not because he was blind, but because accepting them would mean admitting that his entire theory of victory was wrong. By late 1967, internal briefings showed that despite years of escalation, enemy operational capacity remained intact. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces were not collapsing. They were adapting, replacing losses, choosing when and where to fight. Publicly, Westmoreland said the opposite. In November 1967, he told Americans that the enemy was losing the will to fight, and that the end of the war was coming into view. This was not propaganda from Washington. It was Westmoreland personally selling the strategy. 2 months later, the Tet Offensive began. Militarily, Tet was a disaster for North Vietnam. Tens of thousands of enemy fighters were killed. None of the major cities were held. From Westmoreland's perspective, it should have validated his logic. Instead, it destroyed it. Tet proved that enemy losses had not translated into paralysis. The war's political center of gravity, both in Vietnam and the United States, cracked instantly. If the enemy could launch coordinated attacks across the entire country after years of slowly reducing their strength, then Westmoreland's body counts had become meaningless. He understood this almost immediately. What followed wasn't a firing or a public reckoning. In June 1968, he was quietly reassigned as Army Chief of Staff, a promotion that doubled as an exit. No hearings, no denunciations, just removal from the theater. Westmoreland didn't lose Vietnam in battle. He realized the math no longer described reality, and the system moved him aside before that realization spread upward. Admiral Ernest J. King. By 1944, Admiral Ernest King knew something few Americans wanted to hear. Japan was already beaten. Its navy had been shattered at Midway and the Philippine Sea. Its merchant fleet was being annihilated by submarines. Its industrial capacity was collapsing under blockade and bombing. Japan could no longer meaningfully project power beyond its home island. Strategically, the war was over. Politically, it wasn't. King was the driving force behind the Pacific Island hopping campaign, a series of brutal, high-casualty assaults designed to move U.S. forces closer to Japan. By late 1944, these operations no longer changed the outcome of the war. They changed the terms under which it would end. King understood that Japan might seek a negotiated surrender if offered conditional terms, especially regarding the emperor. He also understood that Washington had no interest in that option. Unconditional surrender had become a political necessity, not a military one. That distinction mattered. From Iwo Jima to Okinawa, U.S. forces fought battles that King knew were no longer about winning. They were about forcing psychological collapse. The goal was not victory, but submission so complete that post-war ambiguity would be impossible. Privately, King acknowledged that casualties were being incurred to achieve a political endpoint, not a strategic one. Publicly, the war remained framed as necessary, inevitable, and just short of completion. King did not resist this logic. Instead, he hardened to it. King never broke. He absorbed the contradiction and executed it. That wasn't failure. It was acceptance that victory and conclusion were no longer the same thing. General Curtis LeMay. Curtis LeMay understood earlier than most that some wars cannot be won, only concluded through devastation. As the architect of the firebombing campaign against Japan, LeMay abandoned precision bombing entirely. High-altitude strikes weren't breaking Japanese production or morale, so he dropped bombers low, stripped them of defensive guns, and saturated cities with incendiaries. Tokyo burned. Over 100,000 civilians died in a single night. LeMay knew this wouldn't produce surrender by itself. What it would produce was leverage, the destruction of social infrastructure so complete that continued resistance became irrational. After the war, LeMay carried this logic into the nuclear age. As head of Strategic Air Command, he built a force designed not to fight wars, but to make them unthinkable. He privately acknowledged that nuclear war could not be won in any meaningful sense. The purpose of the arsenal was psychological dominance, not victory. This is the realization most people miss. LeMay didn't believe in winning future wars. He believed in preventing leaders from choosing them by guaranteeing catastrophe. When critics accused him of amorality, he didn't deny it. He denied that morality mattered once war reached a certain scale. At that point, deterrence replaced ethics. LeMay's genius, and his darkness, was his clarity. He knew the concept of winning had collapsed under modern technology. The only remaining objective was control through fear. General David Petraeus. David Petraeus represents the most modern version of this pattern, and the most uncomfortable. Petraeus understood Iraq and Afghanistan well. As the architect of modern counterinsurgency doctrine, Petraeus emphasized population security, local legitimacy, and political integration. Under his command, violence dropped dramatically during the Iraq surge. Tactically, it worked. Strategically, it didn't. Petraeus saw the problem clearly. Military force could suppress instability, but it could not generate political legitimacy. The moment U.S. pressure eased, local power structures reverted. Corruption returned. Sectarianism reasserted itself. The realization came not as a single event, but as a pattern. Every success required permanent presence. Every withdrawal erased gains. The war wasn't progressing. Privately, Petraeus acknowledged that there was no purely military path to resolution. Publicly, he framed success as fragile but achievable, because admitting otherwise would collapse the mission entirely. Petraeus wasn't removed. He was promoted, reassigned, and eventually elevated to CIA director. Another sideways exit from command responsibility. What makes Petraeus different is that he never pretended the war was winnable in the traditional sense. He understood that modern interventions often aim not at victory, but at management, reducing chaos to tolerable levels, while political actors fail to deliver outcomes worth defending.